For step 3, we're going to start implementing the item click listeners and also saving the check state. So first, we're going to create the checklist item listener, which was going to have 4 methods. We're going to start with the onCreateClick. Inside the checklist adapter, go to the bottom and create a new interface. Name this ChecklistItemListener. And inside, create the new method onCreateClick. This will be used whenever our placeholder view holder is clicked. So we're going to add this listener to that class. Apart from taking in the view, this view holder is now going to also take in the listener. And when we create this class, we're going to have the listener call the click method. Because we updated this, we're going to need to go back to our onCreateViewHolder and pass in the new listener as well. Now at the top, we're going to also need to take in this because when we instantiate the checklist adapter, we're going to need the listener passed in. This listener is created from the fragment, and here we're going to make use of our view model as the listener implementation. So we're going to update our adapter to take in that parameter. Finally, we're going to go inside our view model and have that implement our interface. Now at the bottom, we're going to need to create an implementation for the method onCreateClick. What we want to do is to update our state so that whenever the users click the placeholder item, we're going to create a new empty content. So first, we're going to extract the list of items from our existing state. And then when we have the list of items, we're going to add the new content to the end of the list just above the placeholder. For this simple example, we're just going to use the size of the items as the item ID, and then we're going to have an empty text as this is just a new item, and then have the check to be false. After adding in this new item, we will need to update the state so that our list of data is correctly updated. If you go back to our initial initialization, we do not need this list of dummy data anymore, so we can just start off with just the placeholder. If you run the app now, you should see the simple placeholder item with nothing else. And when you click on the create, you should see a new list of empty item created. Right now, when you click on a new item, the keyword does not show by default. So let's add a new boolean to help this. Add a new parameter hasFocus to the content data class, and when we create this new item, we're going to change the hasFocus to be true. Inside our checklist content view holder, we're going to check whether the item has focus or not. And when we do have the focus, we're going to request the focus so that the cursor is displayed onto the edit text. We also want to show the software keyboard. So we're going to request the input method manager and then show the keyboard from there. Now when you run the app and you try to click on the new Create button, you should see that the keyboard is automatically pulled up. After showing the keyboard, we would also want to disable the focus when users switch away from that specific item. So we're going to add a new method on item focus state updated. This is going to take in the item ID so that we can reference the exact row we want and the new focus boolean. Inside our binding, we're going to add the focus change listener, and when that is updated, we're going to call our listener's callback method. We're going to pass in the item ID of our content row, as well as whether the focus is set to true or not. So when we create the content view holder now, we're going to need to also pass in the same listener that we've already created for our adapter. Final step is to go back to our checklist view model and to implement this new method. Here we're doing something similar to the onCreate click, where we're just going through the list of our existing items and checking whether any of the rows match the item ID that we want to update. If we find a content row where the item ID matches the one we want, then we will set the focus to be the new boolean. Otherwise, we will just want to return the existing item as it is. Finally, we'll update the state so that we can get the latest values from the UI. Next, we're going to add the listener for when the text is changed inside the edit text. Before we add the new method in the interface, we're going to create a new class which is going to make use of coroutines. This simple text watcher class is going to first take in a method which will be called whenever the text is updated and we want to pass the result back to the listener. The text watcher has three methods, but we are only interested in the last one, onTextChanged. Here we're going to set a few variables, which is the debounce period, the coroutine scope, and also the debounce job. So whenever the text changes, we're going to first cancel the previous job and then launch the new coroutine scope method. Then this is going to first delay by the amount of period, which is 500 milliseconds, before having a callback. This allows the edit text to not receive all the callbacks all the time, and then we'll have a delay. In the checklist item listener, add the new method onItemTextUpdated with the parameters item ID and text. Inside our view holder, we're going to first create the new content variable to help store the item ID. Next, we're going to set it whenever we bind the item to the view holder. We already have the listener inside the view holder, so when this is instantiated, we're going to set up the listeners. First, we're going to add the focus change listener like we did previously, and then this is going to take in the lambda, and we're going to update the content UI based on that. Next, we're going to add the listener for the text change. So whenever the edit text is updated, this callback is going to be called, but we're going to pass in our debug query listener so that not all the text is immediately pushed to us. There will be a delay. We also need to set the cursor of the item text to be at the end, because when we set the text, the cursor will be reverted to the beginning. Now we can go back to our view holder and implement the new method. Similar to the focus state updated, we're going to go through the already list of items and check whether the item ID matches. If it does, we're going to update the text instead of the focus boolean. And as a final step, in the focus change listener, we only care about when the focus has been disabled. So we can add another checking so that only when it is not in focus that we update our focus state listener. We can now run the app and try typing in some text. You will notice that sometimes the click methods will skip some letters. This is because of the debouncer. So in order to tweak it, you can update the number to be higher to reduce the number of events, or lower so that every event is captured. Finally, we're going to add the check listener for the item views. Add a new method on item check state updated to your interface. And inside our view holder, we're going to add the new listener. Set on check listener for the checkbox, and similar to the previous ones, we're just going to add the listener on click method there. Pass in the item ID and whether the check boolean or not. Inside our view module, implement the method, and just like the previous ones, we're going to check if the item ID matches. If so, we're going to update the check state. Now when you run the app, and if you check the item, it should be shown.